mizinda yaipa palipose zinthu zosafu mizinda yaipa palipose zinthu zosafunika atikonzere ndindani ngati eni yake siti kuchita zongotaya zinyalala zipangitsa nyengo kunyanyala madzi kusefuka ipweya yoyipa kupuma ndiyambitsa ndine ndikonza ndine oti malo woyipa mavuto ofika dzandipeza ine dziko la ukhondo malo wa ukhondo ufulu wanga dziko la ukhondo malo wa ukhondo udindo wanga I want you to join me tikonze mizinda ishaini osata ya zinyarara mapiri matauni museu tamakhala niko ngati muli ndi nzeru zinyarara zimaploka ngarande then madzi yasefukira paliponse zikalowa madzi yayipa ife tikamwa madzi matenda afika inde ndikonza ndine oti madzi woyipa matenda ofika dzandipeza inde dziko la ukhondo malo wa ukhondo ufulu wanga dziko la ukhondo malo wa ukhondo udindo wanga ay 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 hey ufulu wanga. Yo, one more time saying it. Ay, 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 ay. Hey, udindo anga. Now, everybody say, ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. Oh, say, ay, 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 ay. Yeah, everybody say, ay, 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 ay. Oh, say, ay, 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 ay. Say, ay, 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 ay. Toka dziko la ukhondo malo wa ukhondo ufulu wanga oh yeah dziko la ukhondo malo wa ukhondo udindo wanga dziko la ukhondo malo wa ukhondo ufulu wanga
This lovely Thursday morning of the 4th of March 2021. Many thanks to Pixie for that just ended song. He had agreed to send us a special song on his national cleanup specifically for this event. He's one of the artists that we're working with when it comes to taking care of the planet. It is now 10 a.m. according to my time, which is the exact time for us to start our virtual launch. So welcome everyone to the 2020 Human Development Report that is being hosted by UNDP Malawi. I'll be your moderator for the event. My name is Madali Tsombendera. I work as a communications analyst. I'm also working hand in hand with a few colleagues who are in the background and making sure that technology does not let us down today. We had the global event for the Human Development Report last year in December, and since then we've had a series of countries launching in different places, and today Malawi is having its country launch. This is our very first Human Development Report that is fully virtual, looking at the current context of COVID-19. So many thanks to iHub Media Platform, who we have partnered with us today to stream the event. We are currently recording the entire session of this webinar, and it will be streamed on several platforms. be streamed on Zodiac, on Times, and on the iHub platform as well. This will be a 2-hour event, and from all the participants currently joining us live for this webinar, it is key that you're part of this conversation too as the discussions are happening. So you will see that there's Q&A dashboard on your screens. We welcome your questions, your comments, additions that are relevant to the discussions. And we're going to have a short session where we're going to bring out the questions for our panelists to answer to them. Now, the 2020 Human Development Report is called The Next Frontier, Human Development and Anthropocene. As a communications person, I must admit, I had a fun time trying to pronounce the word, let alone trying to define it. So we're going to have a fun competition where we're inviting all of our participants to go into the Q&A dashboard and try to define what you think the word Anthropocene means. There's going to be a small reward at the end of this where we're going to announce the closest definition to that. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning we've been honored with the presence of the guest of honor for the event. She has been quite amazing in her work on environmental issues. The Minister of Forest and Natural Resources, Honorable Nancy Tembo. We also have the host for our launch amongst us, the UNDP resident representative for Malawi, Mr. Shigeki Komatsubara. We will also get to hear from our panelists, which comprises of different think tanks in several areas of development, and they will give us their personal, institutional, and professional reflections on the Human Development Report. On the panelists we have Dr. Yanira and Tupanyama, the Principal Secretary for the Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources. We have Dr. Thomas Muntali, who is the Director General of the National Planning Commission of Malawi. We have Professor Sosten Chiwota, the Regional Director for Leadership for Environment and Development. We have Ms. Lingariwe Mihoa, the Country Director for Oxfam Malawi. We have Dr. Tiesere Chikapa, a Senior Lecturer of Chancellor College, University of Malawi. We have Ms. Gloria Majiga Kamoto, who is the Program Manager from the Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy. Shortly, we are going to have welcoming remarks from our host, the resident representative, Mr. Shigeki Komatsubara. I will thereafter invite our guest of honor, Honorable Tembo, for our official remarks. Soon after that, we're going to have a symbolic launch of the 2020 Human Development Report with the guest of honor and our host. From there, we're going to beam a short animated video that will give an overview of the 2020 Human Development Report. This will be followed by a presentation by the UNDP Portfolio Manager who looks at resilience and sustainable growth, Mr. Andrew Spezowka. After that presentation, we're going to have our Q&A session where I'll be throwing questions to our panelists, and our panelists, as I indicated, are supposed to share their reflections on the implications of the 2020 Human Development Report. As this is going on, without wasting any more time, may I therefore invite our host for the event for his opening remarks, the UNDP resident representative, Mr. Shigeki Komatsubara.
I'm speaking to you from my office in Lilongwe due to the circumstances we all find ourselves. So let me start. The Minister of Forests and Natural Resources, Honorable Nancy Tembo, Principal Secretary, Ministry of Forests and Natural Resources, Dr. Yanira Tupanyama, sorry about it. I see distinguished panelists, Dr. Thomas Muntali, Director General, National Planning Commission, and really our colleagues and distinguished panelists from academia, development partners, and indeed really thought leaders from Malawi, ambassadors, fellow colleagues, heads of development agencies, senior government representatives, policymakers, our partners and friends from civil society, research communities and academia, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, and all protocol observed, good morning. Allow me first to welcome you all to this virtual launch of 2020 UNDP's Human Development Report in Malawi, entitled The Next Frontier, Human Development and Anthropocene. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the first Human Development Report and the introduction of Human Development Index. Human development is about expanding human freedom and opening more choices for people to chart their own development paths according to their diverse values. Since its inception of HDR in 1990, the report has measured quality of life using the Human Development Index to inform public and political debate around development and progresses by encouraging countries to measure their own progress. This year's Human Development Report could not be more timely and important, addressing how we can and must live well with each other and with non-human natures on a planet facing huge pressures. The HDR observes that we are now entering a new age, the age of Anthropocene, in which humans, we, are a dominant force shaping the future of the planet and ourselves. The uniqueness of the 2020 Human Development Report is that it explores how we can achieve human development at the same time easing and saving our planet. The report presents an experimental HDI adjusted for planetary pressure called Planetary Adjusted Human Development Index. This reflects how different development paths are impacting the planet, and findings show that focusing on distribution of material resources alone overlooks the pressure we are putting on our own planet. By extending the measure of human development to include the way people are stewarding the planet and their interactions with nature, policymakers can gain a richer appreciation on how climate change and planetary health impact our own human progress. Concerns over ranking always can prompt and motivate policymakers to review the robustness of our policies and strategies and aspire to enhance human development in our country. The HDR comes at a time when COVID-19 has spread so quickly around the world, taking tolls on us and taking roots whenever it has landed, exacerbating myriads of inequalities in human development. The COVID-19 pandemic is the latest crisis facing the world and our country. By no means it won't be the last, unless we make peace with nature and find a way to coexist and develop together without further jeopardizing the health of our planet. COVID-19 pandemic has brought into sharp focus the parallel epidemics of inequality, climate change, and indeed systemic risk for human beings around the world. With over 2.3 million deaths and 106.5 million infected individuals as of early February 2021, global human development is expected to decline for the first time since 1990, when this report started, with the global economy set to contract by a few percentage points, pushing close to 100 million people back into extreme poverty. Pandemic should be understood in a way as a warning sign of the changing nature of our interaction with the nature and our Mother Earth. Malawi joins most countries in enduring an economic crisis on the same grim scale as the health emergency weakens, with a growing number of people out of work, a steep decline in revenues, and widespread disruption to businesses and people's ability to safeguard their livelihoods. Indeed, COVID-19 is as serious as it is as a health phenomenon. It is far more than the health impacting the development path of our collective society and the economy. Against these backdrops, Malawi's development trajectory cannot be separated from its natural resources practices, with environmental degradation undermining and narrowing its options, putting a brake on exit from poverty for the majority of its predominantly rural population. Recent research points to the scarcity of biomass as a primary energy source for growing population. I do vividly remember a speech I made when I said that if Malawi continues to lose trees at this rate, in 10 to 15 years we may not have any trees standing at all. That is the seriousness of the environmental degradation. We live in a planet, we live with the environment. Extensive soil degradation, unproductive landscapes, and impact of climate disruption undermining labor and natural resource productivity. The 2019 Malawi State of Environment report points to several negative trends associated by the pressure of human on nature in Malawi. Some of the bullet points include the land degradation is widespread and severe. 60% of Malawi's land is affected by soil erosion and nutrient losses. 50% forest and woodland loss over the last 40 years, reflecting high rates of deforestation. Fish stocks and biodiversity declining. Climate change exerting increasing stress on Malawi's ecosystems to the point of threatening to erode really hard-won developmental gains. Natural resources key to rural livelihoods and to the economy of Malawi. Without resilient national systems, it will become increasingly difficult to build a more resilient economy or society, and especially to break the cycle of food insecurity. The Malawi HDI value for 2019 is 0.483, which has marginally improved from 2018 with 0.478. This puts the country, although, in the low human development category and positions itself at 174 out of 189 countries and territories on the Human Development Report. To emphasize, highlight a few points, the Malawi 2019 HDR 0.483 is still below the average of 0.513 for countries in low human development group, and below the average of 0.547 for countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The last available public expenditure reviews indicated Malawi allocated a little less than 1% of its annual GDP on environment-related expenditures, and that less than 1% of this is decentralized to the ground level. Climate change is likely to increase over environmental stresses and make the job of reducing poverty and boosting economic growth more challenging. About 90% of Malawi's food production comes from one rain-fed crop per year, meaning that as long as there's continued degradation of nature and combined with erratic patterns of rainfalls as a result of climate change, effects like drought can quickly increase the risk of food insecurity and poverty, as well as too much rain at one time. 2020 HDR therefore asks the question, do we choose in the face of uncertain future to embark on a bold new path that expects our freedom and prosperity while easing planetary pressure and finding new values from coexisting with our Mother Earth? Or do we choose to try to continue the business as usual? Thank you very much for today, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mother.
Many thanks to our host, our resident representative, Mr. Shigeki Komatsubara. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite the guest of honor for the event, Honorable Tembo. Thank you.
UNDP resident representative, Mr. Shigeki Komatsubara, Director General, National Planning Commission, Dr. Thomas Mutali, the Secretary for Forestry and Natural Resources, Dr. Yanira Tupanyama, Head of Center for Social Research, Dr. Spezowka, Country Manager, Oxfam Malawi, Ms. Mihowa, Director, Leadership in Environment and Development Lead, Professor Sosten Jota, Program Manager, Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy, SEPA, Ms. Gloria Majiga Kamoto, all stakeholders watching and listening to us today, the moderator, Ms. Madalitso Bendera, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is with great pleasure that I preside over the launch of the 2020 Human Development Report this morning. As we are aware, the year 2020 has been a very difficult year. The world has been affected with COVID-19 pandemic, and the Malawi has not been spared. For this reason, allow me to start by thanking the team that worked tirelessly to put together this report. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you may recall that the first Human Development Report was developed in 1990, and the report we are launching today is the 30th. This initiative was created by the UNDP as a tool to conceive and measure development progress in countries all over the world, complementing the use of gross domestic product, GDP. The report provides very important information on the trend of development and ranks countries based on whether their people have freedom and opportunity to live the lives they value. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year's report has been developed under the theme, The Next Frontier, Human Development and Anthropocene. The theme is pointing to the fact that the power to change the planet is in our hands as human beings, the age of humans. Almost all the changes the world is facing today emanate from our actions. Challenges such as climate change, wetland loss, loss of forests, biodiversity loss, water and land degradation, disease outbreaks including COVID-19, just to mention a few. However, it is not too late to reverse the situation if we make peace with nature and strive to attain the 2050 vision for biodiversity of living in harmony with nature and Agenda 2063 on the Africa we want. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the 2020 Human Development Report has clearly shown that nature-based solutions have the potential to contribute to transformational change that will restore our vulnerable ecosystems' integrity and sustain the benefit of nature to people. This is possible for all sectors of development, mainstream environmental management in their development plans, and increase investment and investment incentives for conservation. In so doing, Malawi will not only be implementing commitments to the multilateral environmental agreements such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, UNCCD, United Nations Framework on the Convention to Climate Change, UNFCCC, and its Paris Agreement, but also accord full recognition of the rights of future generations as enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of Malawi on the right to clean and healthy environment. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Malawi welcomes recommendations made by the 2020 Human Development Report, such as the exploration of other alternative metrics of human development that include accounting for carbon dioxide emissions and material footprint of countries. Reduction in carbon dioxide emission will not only contribute to mitigation of climate change effects, but also contribute to improvement of the ecosystem functioning, which has a positive bearing on human health and agricultural productivity. Suffice to say that Government of the Republic of Malawi, through the leadership of His Excellency the President, Dr. Lazarus Chakwera, has prioritized environmental sustainability, including climate change management and conservation of nature, as key factors contributing to sustainable development and attainment of MJDS3 and Malawi Vision 2063. We are certain that our social effort to restore degraded ecosystems, reduce carbon emissions, and conserve biodiversity will significantly contribute to transform change at national level as well as at global level. This year, government is committed to planting 60 million trees to restore degraded land and contribute to climate change mitigation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me at this point emphasize on the importance of local communities and local decentralized structures in natural resource management. Effective participation of local communities in the implementation of nature-based solutions to environmental challenges being faced countrywide is key in safeguarding ecosystem integrity. Hence the need to empower them technically and where appropriate financially. I therefore call upon government and development partners and other stakeholders to support community interventions that promote nature-based solutions to the country's challenges, especially now as countries are striving to bounce back as we continue fighting the devastating effects of COVID-19 pandemic. Lastly, let me thank all those who contributed to the development of this report, both technically and financially. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, it is now my singular honor to officially launch the 2020 Human Development Report for Malawi. Thank you all for your attention. Stay safe and God bless you all.
Mizinda yaipa palipose zinto zosafunika ati konzeri ndindan ngati eni yake siti kuchita.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to beam a short animated video on the Human Development Report, and soon after that I will ask my colleague Mr. Spezowka to share his screen and give us the overview of the Human Development Report and also help me perhaps pronounce the word correctly. Over to you.
When it comes to measuring development, common metrics like GDP reflect the economic development of a nation. However, the well-being of citizens entails more than mere economic aspect. To address this, UNDP first adopted the Human Development Index in 1990. HDI is a composite measurement indicating the average well-being of all people in a given country. It identifies 3 dimensions that quantify the quality of life. 1. The opportunity for a long, healthy life, measured by life expectancy at birth. 2. The opportunity for knowledge, measured by expected years of schooling for children and mean years of schooling of adults. 3. The opportunity for a decent standard of living, measured by gross national income per capita. Each of the three dimensions are computed into a final number or index, which is expressed in a value between 0 to 1. The higher the score of a country, the more opportunities its citizens have. 2020 marks the 30th year of HDI. A new addition in this year's report is the PHDI. The Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI accounts for key planetary pressures and ushers the HDI into a new geologic epoch, the Anthropocene, or the Age of Humans. The 2020 HDI report identifies 3 building blocks to create real, lasting change. 1. Working with, not against, nature. 2. Improving incentives to prevent planetary damage. And 3. Changing social norms. It is time for all countries to redesign their paths for human progress by fully accounting for the dangerous pressures we put on the planet. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity for humanity to choose to change so that people and planet will prosper together.
Thank you for the introduction, Nada. It's a pleasure to join Honorable Minister Tembo, the UNDP resident representative, our distinguished panelists, and all of you joining us online to share with you the following overview of the 2020 Human Development Report. The 2020 Human Development Report takes as its theme the next frontier, human development in the Anthropocene. The human development approach espoused in all HDRs focuses on expanding the richness of human life rather than simply the richness of the economies in which we live. It's about giving people everywhere more freedom to live the lives that they value. Economic growth is important, especially for developing countries like Malawi. This means developing people's abilities and giving them a chance to use them. For example, educating a young girl in Malawi builds her skills, but isn't of full use if she's denied access to jobs or does not have the right skills for the local labor market, or she doesn't enjoy the safety and security of her person. The Human Development Reports underscore 3 foundations for human development: to live a long, healthy, and creative life, to be knowledgeable, and to have access to resources needed for a decent standard of living. Building on these 3, the 2020 Human Development Report is organized into 3 parts: renewing human development for the Anthropocene, which can also be pronounced Anthropocene, both are fine, acting for change in this new epoch, and exploring new metrics for human development. Specifically, the 2020 Human Development Report unpacks humanity's destabilizing influence on the planet and how this dynamic mirrors the strains in our own societies. The Human Development Report calls for a just transformation in the way we live, the way we work, the businesses and markets we rely on, and how we cooperate. The very issues we're grappling with today as the impacts of the global pandemic have implications on Malawi's own policies and development plans, as we'll explore today during this virtual launch. As a contribution to the analytical scaffolding underpinning this transition, the 2020 HDR proposes a planetary pressures adjusted human development index, or the Planetary HDI for short. What are some of the key takeaways from the 2020 HDR? First and foremost, the warning lights are flashing red for our societies and for the planet, and they have been for some time. We are at an unprecedented moment in the history of humankind and in the history of our planet, where future generations will face fewer options for human flourishing without this generation taking action today. Many inequalities in human development have been increasing and continue to do so. Scientists have long warned that pathogens will emerge more frequently from interactions among humans, livestock, and wildlife, interactions that have been steadily increased in scale and intensity, and ultimately been squeezing local ecosystems so hard that deadly viruses such as COVID-19 spill out. The Human Development Report posits that if equity, innovation, and stewardship of nature are advanced in unison, we can both flourish and ease planetary pressures. At its core, the Human Development Report calls for abolishing these stark distinctions between people and planet in the way the world and countries like Malawi, how we advance its infrastructure systems, its markets, its energy systems, its education and health systems, and indeed its entire society. In little more than a decade, the global financial crisis, the climate crisis, the inequality crisis, and now the COVID-19 crisis have all shown that the resilience of global systems is breaking down. The benefits of nature-based approaches to human development in the Anthropocene are tremendous, ranging from climate change mitigation, biodiversity protection, and ensuring against compounding risks to our well-being. Each part of the HDR delves into these key takeaways in more depth, starting with the implications of the Anthropocene as a planetary epoch that will shape the outcomes that we can achieve for human development. As the HDR emphasizes, we no longer have the luxury, if we ever did, these spheres are indivisible. And nowhere is this indivisibility more apparent than in the impacts of the Great Acceleration. And we see this in this graph in terms of water use, paper production, foreign direct investment, itself a global adaptation to resource scarcity, our emissions of carbon dioxide, surface temperature increases. Importantly, these changes have occurred over a period of unprecedented technological and economic efficiency gains. Notwithstanding these gains, the Great Acceleration continues to exact a heavy toll on both socioeconomic and Earth systems. We find ourselves in a period of global ecological overshoot, where we have far exceeded the carrying capacity of our ecosystems, both globally and indeed at many national levels, as the HDR report underscores. For Malawi, this overshoot is given expression in its level of deforestation, soil erosion, fisheries decline. All these point to the country's ecological deficits and the need for greener investment. Moving to part 2 of the Human Development Report, pathways for change are explored. Underpinning human action and the decade of human action in the lead up to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, this human action during the Anthropocene is development of a planetary ethic or planetary values. Here, the role of education and learning to understand systems and processes of planetary change is pivotal. And it demands civic awareness and critical thinking about the transformations needed to tackle our social and planetary imbalances. Empowered people can unleash real world transformation by changing social norms. The HDR underscores the importance of options. In Malawi, for example, this means options to replace illegal charcoal production with other forms of income or access to affordable solar PV systems instead of diesel generators to pump irrigation water or to keep dairy tanks cool in districts across the country. When people do not have options, their agency is limited by their lack of choice. And here, innovation is critical. Incentives for innovation such as seed money are needed, together with regulations and subsidies that lower the cost of scaling up innovation and directing people's behavior to ease planetary pressure and national pressure on Malawi's ecosystems. Policies can offer reasons for people to change their behavior, and this can in turn trigger large-scale behavioral tipping points. In Malawi, the thin plastic ban and enforcement of forest protection policies are good examples. Financial and monetary authorities are playing a central role during the COVID-19 pandemic. Their choices will also shape incentives that can encourage transitioning to a net zero emissions economic system while reducing socioeconomic inequalities. A green recovery for Malawi means prioritizing fiscal space for green action. Well-designed carbon pricing programs can help counter adverse distributional impacts through redistribution to those less well off. For example, the proceeds of carbon levies can stimulate climate adaptation and mitigation, as well as a just transition from resource-intensive jobs to green jobs. we need to acknowledge that we have a general problem with pricing and that we rarely fully reflect the social and environmental costs of our practices. Thus, we're distorting our behavior. Interest in and momentum for market mechanisms to manage carbon are increasing across Africa. For example, more than 34 countries have interest in market mechanisms and have included these in their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement on climate change. Pricing biodiversity, which is being lost at an alarming rate, remains a vexing challenge. Biodiversity is undervalued in current markets, despite our increasing appreciation of its contributions to our well-being. Payment for ecosystem services can provide incentives for biodiversity preservation. In Malawi, we are only beginning to explore paying people to protect their environment where this makes sense. Importantly, in the last 2 months, 2 seminal reports have been released. The UN Making Peace for Nature report and the UK Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity. Both of these reports outline how to tackle what the UN Secretary General has called humanity's suicidal war with nature. And they provide a roadmap not only for Malawi's development pathway, but indeed for all countries. Investing in nature-based development has global benefits while helping manage risks from local shocks. Importantly, nature-based solutions can also mitigate the health impacts of extreme weather, whether through restoring ecosystems, access to more natural or green spaces to address humanity's spiritual and psychological needs, and reducing exposure to heat stress for people whose livelihoods keep them outdoors. Globally, around 4 billion people, that's 60% of the world's population, live in regions with nearly permanent water stress, and 3 million lack basic hand washing and sanitation facilities at home, the importance of which is clearly underscored during the COVID-19 pandemic, might face clean water scarcity by 2050. Enhancing water's availability and quality is thus a major challenge, especially in Malawi. Protecting water sources through nature-based solutions improves water quality. The process can reduce water treatment costs for urban suppliers and improve access to safe drinking water, especially for rural communities. Similarly, nature-based solutions can enhance food security and regenerative agriculture, including through soil microbial diversity, genetic seed diversity, pollinator diversity, crop, livestock, and fish diversity, and more, all of which underpins food security at all levels. The benefits of nature-based solutions are widely distributed across regions and human development groups. In speaking to the importance of stewardship of resources and of protecting nature and local action, and of innovation for new forms of production in a greener economy, these themes are poised to gain further ground in Malawi, particularly as it translates its Vision 2063 into short and medium-term planning in the context of raising its own national ambition under the Paris Agreement. As you can see in these graphs, as mentioned, the distributional benefits of reforestation, natural forest management, avoiding land degradation in wetlands and peatlands, the benefits are widely distributed across regions of the world and also across human development groups. Governments, especially national governments. Only governments have the formal authority and power to marshal collective action towards shared challenges, whether that's enacting and enforcing a carbon price, removing laws that marginalize and disenfranchise people, or setting up the policy and institutional frameworks backed by public investment that can spur ongoing, broadly shared innovation. At the same time, we cannot ignore the opportunity for and the importance of social mobilization from the bottom up. Individuals, communities, and social movements demand, pressure, and support government action. Government leadership by example matters. And as you can see, across the world, it matters equally. The HDR underscores that when people have agency, they support policies that are aligned with their values, and they act on them. And they work across all forms of agency, from individual agency and their individual choices to collective agency of people working together. This at the same time demands strategic and political agency for long-term planning that influences everyday decision-making. Lastly, part 3 of the HDR examines new metrics. Information is organized in 4 dimensions: the status of human development, energy systems, material cycles, and transforming our future. The planetary HDI, looking around on the next slide, the horizontal axis, shows the HDI as we know it traditionally. On the vertical axis, shows the index of planetary pressures. Also plotted here are contour lines correspond to the same planetary HDI values that would result from different combinations of human development and the index of planetary pressures, or isoquants, for those familiar with statistical methods. The planetary HDI values increases as the lines move towards the bottom right corner. As you can see, that the green triangle. This corner is the aspirational destination of the human development journey in the Anthropocene. It can also be seen at the point at which we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but not all countries are at the same level. For instance, country A and country B have very different HDI values, 0.55 and 0.85 respectively, but they have the same planetary HDI value of 0.55 because the greater progress in human development in country B has been coupled with much greater planetary pressures. This simple example shows the importance of a joint assessment of socioeconomic and planetary pressure indicators as part of a single framework. While Malawi's planetary HDI score does not change appreciably because of its low energy and material throughput have low planetary impacts, we all can see the social and ecological stressors are growing in the country. Applying this metrics across the globe of the more than 60 very high human development countries in 2019, only 10 would keep this classification under the Planetary Adjusted Human Development Index. Whereas high HDI countries have exacted a heavy ecological toll and planetary pressures, it is actually low and medium HDI countries that have improved their conditions without exacting as high a burden on planetary pressures. But this movement for all countries has been too slow. This movement, by that I mean the movement to higher HDI at the same time as easing planetary pressures. It's been too slow, and it's also been too modest. Human development in the Anthropocene will require all countries to rapidly shift substantially towards the bottom right corner by maximizing choice, people's choice, by maximizing freedoms and opportunities, and most importantly, people's agency for action. We cannot advance human progress in the Anthropocene by making planetary pressures a side issue. It can't be about one law or one policy. Every strategy and every plan from every government must be consistent with easing planetary pressures through action at national and local levels. For human development to flourish in the Anthropocene, the HDR is a call to action for Malawi, for Africa, and indeed for the global community. I thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will now have the Q&A session with our panelists. Like I indicated, our panelists will be expected to share their institutional, professional, and personal reflections of the report and the implication of its findings and recommendations for Malawi's development progress. You will each have 3 minutes to respond to each of the questions, so I ask that you keep the responses as brief as you can. Please make sure, dear participants, to make use of the Q&A dashboard and try to ask any questions as our panelists are responding to the questions. We are now going to have Dr. Yanira and Tupanyama the Principal Secretary from the Ministry of Forests and Natural Resources.
So my question to Dr. Tupanyama goes as below. The 2020 Human Development Report emphasizes on the importance of action across government, in effect avoiding the trap that anything to do with conservation or ecology is the exclusive business of ministries of environment. What are some of the opportunities for the full machinery of governments to be better mobilized to promote new ideas of economic, social, and environmental progress? Over to you, Dr. Tupanyama, 3 minutes.
Indeed, we cannot. The issues of conservation and ecology must only be addressed by the ministries that are responsible for environmental affairs or forestry and natural resources. Cross-sector committees in the environment, natural resources and climate change management, which is a great opportunity for the whole society and multi-sectoral planning. But I'll also go ahead and probably give you some of us in implementing and dealing with issues of conservation and ecology per se. First, the Environmental Management Act, which is a new act because it was it came into effect in 2017, establishes the Malawi Environmental Protection Authority, which we had been looking forward to for a long time. And the Act empowers the authority to establish advisory committees and engage experts from outside its permanent staff as it may deem to be appropriate. We can engage advisors, consultants, reviewers. This was also the case where we, in the old, where we had the National Council for the Environment and also the Technical Committee on Environment and Technical Directions in Environment and Natural Resource Management. Change Management Policy of 2016, Malawi established the National Steering Committee, Technical Committee on Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction, which provides strategic and technical guidance in climate and disaster risk management. The Joint Disaster Risk Management. These committees are composed of principal secretaries and directors of key ministries and departments, respectively. We usually have problems that most of the times the principal secretaries delegate and sometimes even the directors. So sometimes it's very difficult to have decisions made or to articulate issues when the principals are not there. The committees also contain representatives from the civil society, the youth, and the academia. That also helps us to get information from the civil society, the perspectives of research work that is done by the academia, but also the youth would bring in their own perspective. Government has established a National Climate Change Fund, which has been mentioned by the civil society, and I think somebody else also mentioned it, under the Environment Management Regulation of 2018, so that it serves as a national basket for implementation of various climate change and resilience building programs as prioritized in our strategic frameworks. These frameworks include the National Determined Contributions NDCs, which consolidates Malawi climate adaptation with the type of funding that is provided in order for other sectors to deal with issues of environmental sustainability. The issue about establishment of the Malawi Environmental Protection Authority will enhance compliance, monitoring of environmental laws, and opportunity to address non-compliance and implementation of our robust environmental policies and strategies that we have in the country. Civil society mentioned about political will. This has been demonstrated at highest level. It also promotes the need to identify ways of integrating green economic growth in general through the strategies that I have mentioned. And most of you listened to our president when he mentioned the fact that we really need to integrate green economic growth which was a commitment at the highest level when he was addressing us at the environmental brief. But he also mentioned that Malawi cannot reach its destiny if we do not settle our debt with nature. We felt that that was commitment at highest level, and we are so happy with that. We translated the environmental brief to actions, and we can share that with colleagues if there is need for you to look at it and also input or critique it. Most critical, that has not been mentioned maybe by most of us, is the fact that we need to promote environmental awareness and participation at all levels of the society, as it is a responsibility of all to ensure that management and conservation of natural resource capital should be taken as a responsibility for you, me, and also the public out there. Thank you for now.
Many thanks. The next question is for Dr. Thomas Muntali, who is the Director General for the National Planning Commission.
The Human Development Report outlines the contours of the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index, which is a PHDI in short. At the same time, there seem to be a lot of measurement systems adopted across the country, but not always well coordinated or under common national systems. What do you see as the practical implications of moving in this direction in Malawi, of adopting this Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index, PHDI? For example, what would it take for the Commission and other organs of government, perhaps, to integrate this approach into its National Human Development Report? Over to you, Dr. Muntali.
We wish we had this report earlier enough, because we could already have been looking at the HDI adjusted, planetary adjusted index. You will have seen in the Malawi 2063 vision document that we do have in there HDI, but if we had the information like this, we would already have worked with NSO to see how best we could have done that. But the beauty is the Malawi 2063 is a living document. We have made provisions for its regular reviews in terms of especially the way we're going to track the strategies and indicators in there. And so I think what will be key now is to work with the ministry responsible, as well as the National Statistics Office, to have capacities built around how we can make sure that moving forward in the subsequent national development reports for Malawi, that will be tracking how we are performing as a country in this regard is concerned. So that capacity building aspect with regard to computing it will be key. But related to that, suffice to mention that when all is said and done, the planetary adjusted HDI is just a reflection of the actions on the ground. What is going to be key as a country is for us to work at making sure that the underlying factors that will drive the adjusted HDI are working well. And this relates to the issues that the PS and I think even Linga mentioned, where we are talking about how to create opportunities that would minimize the environmental degradation, whether be it in municipals or in the secondary cities or the growth centers that we're talking about. But as I mentioned earlier on, we're talking of two fronts here. There are those elements where we need to curtail the greed of those that are creating wealth by ensuring that the laws that are controlling them to stay within the lane are being enforced. And related to that is the second one, where we are creating options for those that have no other survival mechanism other than to rely on the environment itself. That's why you're seeing people cutting trees, or they are using charcoal and stuff like that. And that entails the green kind of businesses and jobs. And in the 10-year implementation plan, and we're happy that we've already been working, we're consulted with the Ministry of Natural Resources, is to be able to coordinate and make sure that their strategies and their indicators are in alignment with what we want to put in the national 10-year implementation plan for operationalizing the vision, so that we all are pulling in the same direction. And the same applies to our colleagues from the NGO sector and SEPA, that we work in ensuring that the strategies that we're putting together, including around population, are really issues that are common, and we're putting in that direction together. So I can't agree more with the coordinated approaches that are being advocated on this platform. So I think, in short, that's what I would say around this HDI adjusted HDI as it were. Thanks.
Many thanks for that. I will now invite Dr. Tiesere Chikapa, who's a senior lecturer from the Chancellor College, University of Malawi.
The 2020 Human Development Report calls for new ways of calculating human development, which is indeed a new type of economics that fully accounts for ecosystem health and our collective impacts on the environment and global climate. This is in contrast to traditional approaches which have externalized environment damage. How fit for purpose is the state of the economics profession and training in Malawi to take forward these new approaches that have been outlined in the 2020 Human Development Report? Over to you, Dr. Chikapa.
Okay, thank you very much for that particular question. And let me say at this point that, as Dr. Muntali said earlier on, there's an element of environmental sustainability in the Malawi 2063, which means that there's already something that we are doing. So, for instance, in that, the Malawi Vision 2063, there is something that reads like Malawians should account for the full economic value of environmental resources, which means there's already thinking in that particular direction. But maybe what is key at this point is to do with capacity building, as also what Dr. Muntali said earlier on. Now, Chancellor College, the Department of Economics at Chancellor College is key in that regard, in terms of building that particular capacity. There's a module at the moment at postgraduate level in terms of environmental economics. But then looking at what has been proposed in the HDR 2020, which in terms of the new ways or the additional ways of measuring human development, there's need that maybe we should sit down and do a curriculum review so that we can take on board the suggestions from the HDR, the new proposals, so that we can then strengthen the existing module and see how best we can take into account those proposals. So in that regard, therefore, UNDP's technical advice will be key to ensure that our module is actually in line with the proposals advocated for in the HDR. There's also need for research, building research capacity or investing in research that looks at the validity of measurement frameworks that are there now. How valid are they in terms of the direction that we are taking? What is it that we can do to ensure that we achieve or we are able to use the proposals in the HDR? So let's build capacity. Let's improve our research agenda and ensure that issues to do with environmental economics, issues to do with these adjusted HDIs are taken on board. So key issues there, research capacity, and even the training in terms of economics that is done in the universities in Malawi. Thank you.
Many thanks for that. Let me invite Ms. Ningalireni Mihoa, the Country Director for Oxfam Malawi.
Today, there seems to be so much media coverage that's containing facts and figures on the state of our planet and how our situation has become. These challenges can sometimes be so daunting that we at times become paralyzed to act. How are our civil society organizations confronting these challenges? What's working and what more should be done? Over to you, Ms. Mihoa.
Thank you so much. So civil society has contributed a lot to the area on environmental management. We have done a lot of awareness raising, capacity building of communities. And I remember as early as the early 90s, we had institutions like CUA, Coordination Unit for Rehabilitation of the Environment, the Malawi Environmental Endowment Trust, MIT, and many others that did start the debate around the need for environmental management, sustainable environmental management. Now we have the likes of LEAD, ably led by Professor Chiwota. We have the likes of CISONET, SEPA, these are some of the partners that we are working with who are still continuing to devolve the policies and the programs that are hatched at national level to the community. So there's quite a lot of contributions that we have made. But I have also seen an emergence of NGOs, CSOs that are working towards empowering communities on issues of transparency for instance, issues of large-scale land-based investments. Certainly, Oxfam is supporting the likes of Karonga Diocese, SEPA, and many other agencies that are looking at ways in which communities can be empowered to negotiate with the investments that are happening on their land, to be able to support the implementation of environmental and social impact assessment. We think that this is something else that is good, that people are doing. There are various approaches that are being advanced, like the first informed prior consent that communities are now demanding for each of the investors that's going on their land. But we think that this can actually be scaled up. But we've also seen CSOs playing a big part in terms of producing the evidence. There are a lot of pilots that the NGOs and other CSOs have done on sustainable environmental management, and we think that this is our contribution to the body of knowledge out there. What we can do more, I certainly agree with what the Human Development Report has said around issues of creating agency at the various levels. We know that there are institutions that are doing this, but I think in terms of Malawi, we can do much more by working collaboratively, by making sure that we are building coalitions with communities at grassroots level. We are building coalitions at NGO level, but also with the stakeholders, so that we can press on issues that are affecting Malawi, the planet, and the people. So I think there's a lot of climate justice activism that we can begin to look at.
I will now invite Professor Sosten Chiota, who is the Regional Director for Leadership in Environment and Development.
Professor Chiota, 2020 kicked off the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, noting that for every $1 invested in ecosystem restoration, there is a $9 of economic benefits that can be expected. With this so clear, what do you think needs to be done to help Malawi accelerate restoration of its degraded landscapes and ecosystems? 3 minutes, over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm excited that which builds on the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment of 2000, which showed that most of our ecosystems are actually degraded. And building on what you have said, the report also talks about the fact that if you invest in 20% for afforestation, wetland restoration, and agricultural sustainable agricultural production, you would actually achieve 7% mitigation to actually keep the global temperature rise below 2%. In systems thinking, we'd call this leverage. And therefore, let us look for opportunities for leverage, because nature can do most of the work that we struggle to do. And that's what the ecosystem restoration does. I'll just give quickly two examples. I mentioned that lecturer dries periodically. In the 1970s, when lecturer dried, the experts felt that they have to restock the lake with the fingerlings when the water came back. And this underscores the importance of research. And what they discovered was that actually most of those didn't survive, but the fishery recovered because of the ecosystem is integrated. And so there were fish that survived in lagoons within the rivers. So the kind of management that we need to do is to make sure that when the lake dries, we actually conserve the lagoons, and which currently have actually been mapped.
Many thanks for that. Let me invite Ms. Gloria Majigagamoto, the Program Manager for Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy.
Go to Ms. Gloria Majigagamoto, who is the Program Manager for the Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy. Ms. Majiga Kamoto, as an environmental policy and advocacy organization, the Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy continues to help shape and inform dialogue on Malawi's development pathway. What suggestions can you share about how Malawi can better incentivize its economic and financial systems to integrate nature into their business models? Over to you, Ms. Kamoto.
Thank you. I think there are a lot of options in terms of incentives. The first one will be the fact that the world is on fire, and that should be the key incentive, because there is no business, there is no prosperity without people and planet. So I think that should be the key driving force in terms of responding in our business models and our financial models and development models to how we can make them more sustainable. There's a question that we have often encountered in our work. We do some work in the mining sector. And one of the questions that has been raised is, in the debate of development for least developed countries, is it okay for us to continue to pollute just a little bit to get us to the level of development that other countries have attained? Because they use the same mechanisms. They used coal, they used different other fossils, and those have propelled them to the current level of development. So should we as least developed countries be prohibited from using such options to propel us to that level, to quickly bridge that inequality gap? And that's something that we also battle with as an institution in the work that we do, to reconcile and see that how can we practically talk about incentivizing development for a country like Malawi, which is at the bottom, way bottom of the list. And we're looking at how we can build better, especially after COVID. We can see that we're even worse off now because of the different impacts. But there are different options, and that's something that I think we'll continue to struggle with, and probably that's something for everyone to think about, because even currently in the Vision 2063, coal is one of the options, and it still raises the questions that, are we going to meet our carbon budgets? Should we be looking at mitigation or just adaptation? In terms of the different options, though, we do have models such as the public-private partnerships, because that's a key method that has been highlighted even in the SDGs. So you're looking at creating opportunities for financing for different institutions, but also enterprises. So through PPPs, you're able to finance what would otherwise be very high cost initiatives, but also attain the ability for government to provide a public service at a reasonable cost, or at least with little effort, not so much effort. There's also examples like the power purchase agreements that have come into they expressed in the Malawi renewable energy strategy. So that's an area that we can always explore in different sections. We've seen how we've established small hydro plants that are able to provide electricity, and these are all options that are quite viable. There's a lot of debate on the effectiveness of PPPs, but I think as a blueprint, they do form quite a good starting point for us. There's also corrective pricing. The challenge we have now with markets is that they don't really reflect the actual cost of development, which is a question that I asked before, to say that what is the actual cost of development and are we paying it, and who is shouldering it once companies make ridiculous profits and communities continue to be made worse off. And this means that we could explore options like the price taxes and as well as carbon taxes. There's also an option of extended producer responsibility. This is becoming increasingly popular in sectors that contribute to high levels of pollution. And this is an option that we certainly can consider. For example, with the thin plastic ban in Malawi, we have had that ban in place for a very long time, but is it working? And who is shouldering the cost of battling those that level of pollution that has been costed in by companies? If you look at the debate, there was an argument from companies that they provide 35,000 jobs. But if you look at the tonnage of plastics that we're generating, it's incredibly high. And the cost of just recovering from that level of pollution is too high, even on the government. And this needs to be considered, because the idea is to disincentivize products that cannot be well managed in the sector. And so you create room for innovation, you create the opportunities for companies to start thinking about alternative options. And finally, I think it's also about consumers and creating that opportunity for them to inform what they're interested in, especially in terms of nature-based enterprises. We have seen a lot of interventions in communities that do come in. There's options for banks to take more interest, financing institutions, local financing institutions. They need to take an interest in where they're putting their money, and they need to really consider issues such as free prior informed consent, as well as the impact, the environmental social impact that different ventures do have on the communities that they work on, and how they're incorporating those costs into their business models. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ms. Kamoto. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the Q&A session that we had for you. Many thanks to our panelists for all your reflections, for all the suggestions and the things that came out. You'll be able to view that if you weren't able to join us live. Over to you, Shigeki, and many thanks to everyone.
Without further extending the discussion, I'd just like to express our heartfelt thanks to all the panelists joined us and shared their insights and wisdom with us. And we look forward to continuing the discussion with wider constituencies, so that as Malawi, we can bring the agenda forward and we can put Malawi on the different trajectory for inclusive development. Thank you very much for today, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mother.
Many thanks to the UNDP resident representative, Mr. Shigeki Komatsubara, for your closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the end of our event. I thank you all for joining us live on this day. May you have a very good day, and thank you very much.